What's going on, everybody? It's Greg Peters with the Car Passion channel here, and in today's episode of the Quest for 3 horsepower, I will be installing a gigantic intercooler on the Miata. Now, when I was doing the max power pulls on the Dyno, I did notice the intake temperatures were getting pretty spicy, about 155 degrees Fahrenheit. But from an airflow standpoint, I'm also pushing almost 500 wheel horsepower through a 350 horsepower intercooler core, so I think it's just generally time for an upgrade. And that upgrade comes in the form of a gigantic vibrant intercooler core courtesy of Fab9 tuning, and Fab9 actually makes a modification to this vibrant intercooler to make it even sweeter for us Miata owners. So let's crack into this thing and see what's inside. All right, let's break into this thing. Oh yeah. This is a vibrant 550 horsepower intercooler core. And what Fab9 tuning does is they receive the core and they weld on these nice tabs. So they actually mount up to bolt holes that come on the Miata already, and it puts the intercooler in the perfect location. So that is obviously super nice for install. You don't have to make your own bracketry or anything. I'll do a size comparison once I get the bumper off of the Miata. Actually, I can't even show that. I'm gonna get demonetized. Thank you, Brian, for the custom piece of artwork on my intercooler. Anyways, let's proceed to getting the front bumper off of the Miata so I can eject the old, smaller intercooler core and get this thing installed. The first step to the intercooler install will be to remove the front bumper. There will be some slight differences depending on if you have an NA or NB, but as with almost all installs, they're going to be very similar. I'll start by removing my cooling plate and then by removing the 4 10mm bolts that sit up on top just behind the bumper cover. Next, remove your turn signals with these 2 Phillips head screws and then just unscrew the bulbs. If you're a true ricer like me, you'll have a quick release bumper kit as well, so go ahead and remove the bands, or in my case, cut the zip ties. And remove your side markers in the same fashion you did the turn signals by taking out the Phillips head screws and unplugging the bulb. Inside of your wheel well, you'll find 2 10mm nuts that have to be removed from the bumper. Since these are adjustable, you might want to use a Sharpie to mark exactly where the nuts sit, or you can just line it up using the body panels later. There are 2 more 10mm nuts that sit just in front of the headlights. These can be a little bit tricky to access, but I find that a 1/4-inch drive ratchet gets in there without a problem. Next, remove the lower bumper support rods. Now the bolts in mine are completely rusted into place, and I live in Southern California, so if mine are rusty, yours are probably going to be rusty. But thankfully, there is another way to remove these, and that's by taking off the nut that's found much higher up in the car, and then you can just take off the whole rod with the bumper. Now, up at the mouth of the bumper, you have these little plastic rivets. Basically, what you have to do here is take a Phillips head screwdriver carefully because these strip out very easily. You have to unthread it most of the way, and then the whole rivet will just pop out. The last step would normally be to unbolt the piece that goes between your splash guard and your front bumper, but in my case I just had to cut some zip ties to get that piece of ducting out. Yes, it's cardboard, okay? I do plan on redoing it before I put my front bumper on. But anyways, that's the final step. We should be able to pull this thing right off now. Next, you have to remove the actual collision part of the front bumper, and a little known fact here, you can actually upgrade this with one from a 2005 and newer Ford Mustang. You just have to cut it down to be a little bit more narrow, but those things are incredibly strong. Anyways, so this comes off with just 4 bolts on the top and 4 bolts on the bottom. Super easy. Next, I'll remove the old intercooler. Now, this is just a Fab9 tuning stage 1 350 horsepower intercooler. So it's bolted to the core support. All I have to do is remove these 2 clamps, 2 bolts, and it drops right out. Now that the old intercooler is out, you can really see the size difference here. The new core is much wider and taller, and you can imagine just by looking at the sheer size of this thing, of course it's going to dissipate heat a lot better, but you know I'm going to scientifically test that once I get to the dyno. Now, because this intercooler is wider, I will have to make some modifications to my existing intercooler piping, which is not really a big deal. The hard part of installing the Fab9 Stage 2 intercooler is the fact that it does interfere with the core support, so you have a couple different options when it comes to getting it installed. Traditionally, there are two different ways you can go about installing the Fab9 Stage 2 intercooler. Now, I know I said the intercooler does have tabs on it, and those tabs can bolt into a factory threaded hole on the Miata, which is true. But the problem is the intercooler is so much taller that it does contact the core support if you try to bolt it in. So you can either cut the core support, which I really prefer not to do. You can remove the core support and get an aftermarket core support, which will give you extra room for your intercooler and anything else you might be shoving in the front of the Miata. Or you can take the non-threaded holes and weld nuts into them and bolt the intercooler to that. That moves the intercooler back and actually up a little bit, and then you get plenty of clearance and you don't have to cut anything else. I don't have a welder somehow after all these years. Hopefully that's changing soon. But anyways, I don't have a welder and I don't want to cut the core support, and I want to get this intercooler installed right now because I'm retuning the car in 2 days. I don't have time to order an aftermarket core support. So I think I found another way. So this is where the tow hook normally mounts. The Fab9 intercooler tabs fit into these threaded holes here, but if you have the Stage 2, it doesn't exactly fit. So people take this blank hole up here and weld a nut into it and end up mounting the intercooler up there so they don't have to modify the core support. But what I'm gonna try is actually sandwiching the intercooler tabs between the tow hook and the chassis. Now, I did send this information to Fab9 Tuning, and they said they would start working on a redesigned tab, which would allow you to still bolt it into one of the threaded holes, but let the intercooler clear the core support. So this mounting method might be irrelevant soon, so just keep an eye out for the Stage 2 version 2 intercooler. But like I said, my dyno appointment is in 2 days, so ain't nobody got time for that. This is how I'm mounting it. You can see the spacers that I made, which are just washers, that allow the tow hook to pinch the intercooler, but not like bend and deform the tow hook itself. The other problem I created for myself is I only run one tow hook. So for the other side, what I did is take a piece of aluminum flat bar that I got at Home Depot and cut it into the shape of a plate, which is gonna go where the other tow hook would normally be. Then I just used the tow hook to mark out the perfect bolt pattern on that plate, punched out some holes, and ended up with the perfect mounting plate for this intercooler. And it does look a little bit sketchy, but this thing is super solid. It's definitely not going anywhere. And this thing looks like an absolute beast now. The final thing I had to do is just modify the piping to fit. Over on the driver's side, the hard pipes actually line up okay. I just had to cut the coupler itself and shorten it, and that ended up being a very nice fit. Over on the driver's side, the hard pipe was way too long, so I did have to remove it and cut it down, and also cut down the silicone elbow, but after that, everything fit perfectly. All right, so to get the front bumper back on, it's the same steps as you just saw me take, but in the reverse order. I'm actually not installing the bumper right now because I will be towing the car to the dyno this time, and it's way easier to get onto a trailer with no bumper. And I'm also gonna hot swap the intercoolers on the dyno to do some testing, and that again will be way easier with no bumper on the car. As far as how the intercooler looks, almost the same as the old one. You can tell that this intercooler is a lot wider inside the mouth, but a lot of the size gain just goes up into the bumper where you can't really see it. But the larger core is going to flow a lot better. It's going to have a lot less resistance when I'm trying to make power with this thing. So I'm hoping more than anything that it's just going to be a little bit safer with some cooler intake temperatures. I know that the turbo is pretty much completely maxed out at 500, but I'm still going to try to crack it. But anyways, that is for an upcoming video. If you guys are planning on making big power 400 plus with your Miatas, please consider the Fab9 Stage 2 intercooler. This thing is massive and I think it's going to perform great, but we'll find out soon. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button if you did enjoy the video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out. All right, since I'm not going to do another dyno prep video, but I am making some additional changes, I just kind of want to cover those things real quick. So One thing that I experienced on the dyno was the inability to raise boost in the high RPM. Now that could be one of two causes. Either the exhaust pressure is overwhelming the wastegate spring, and even though my boost control solenoid is at 100% duty cycle, the pressure inside the exhaust manifold is still overwhelming the spring and it's not able to keep the wastegate shut. The other possibility is that the exhaust housing and the turbine wheel of the turbo is just completely choked out at that power level, and I won't be able to get any more boost out of it anyways, but that doesn't mean I'm not gonna try. So the first thing I'll be doing is swapping out my 3-port electronic boost control solenoid for a 4-port electronic boost control solenoid. And on the TurboSmart IWG75 dual port, you can actually run 4-port electronic boost control solenoids with an internal wastegate. So you're able to feed boost into the bottom of the chamber, which can actually help hold the wastegate shut. It's not up to just the spring. Now I had one of these initially on my build, but I had some issues with the boost being erratic and just kind of hard to tune. So I swapped out for a 3-port, and it's very easy to tune, but it has a limitation where you can only run a certain amount of boost above the spring pressure. Normally it's 2 times the spring pressure, but if you have an extremely high back pressure system, like in my car making a ton of power on a small turbo, it could be much less than double the spring pressure. So I'm gonna give this a try. The other thing I'm gonna do, which is not necessarily just for the dyno, but actually more for street use, is this is the spring setup that I had in the wastegate on the dyno. This is a 14-pound spring and a 7-pound spring, which totals 21 PSI of wastegate spring. That means the minimum boost I can run is 21 PSI. Now, I do want to use boost by gear to make the car easier to drive and more streetable, and frankly faster, because if you have less power in first gear, it's easier to hook up, etc. But with 21 pounds of wastegate spring, the minimum boost you can run is 21 pounds, and that's not really gonna work. So what I'm gonna do here is just eliminate the 14-pound spring, and I'll only be using a 7-pound spring on the street. But because I'll be using a 4-port electronic boost control solenoid, I should be able to have a very wide range of boost pressure on a lighter spring, so I'll be able to run down to 7 PSI in first gear to help the car get plenty of traction, and then I can slowly ramp the boost up gear to gear. Of course, I am still going to bring the extra springs to the dyno just in case there's any boost control issues, but yeah, that's the plan. And that's one of the ways of making a high horsepower Miata or any high horsepower car streetable. I've got a lot of people commenting saying, well, 500 horsepower is totally useless in a Miata. Well, not in third gear, it's not. So if you have boost by gear, which lowers the boost in first and second gear, allowing the car to get traction, and it can still accelerate at its full potential based on its tires and suspension and all that, and then the boost gets ramped up in third and fourth gear, that's how you use all that power. You're never gonna be able to put down 500 horsepower in first gear, and that's how some of the comments make it sound. They're like, well, 500 horsepower is totally useless in a Miata, all you're gonna do is spin. Well, yeah, if you floor it in first and have like no tuning and no good boost control, yeah, it's gonna spin. But that's the point of tuning, is so you can make a high horsepower car much more streetable. So anyways, thank you guys again for embarking on this journey with me. We're going for 500, and I'll see you guys soon.